Come next year, the Grammy Awards will have a new trophy to honor Asian pop, and despite its good intentions, the announcement has been met with a mixed response. Hello and welcome. You're watching Press Perspective for this Thursday, July 2nd. Here in Seoul, I'm Min Sun-hee. To applaud or not to applaud? That appears to be the question with regard to the addition of a new category for Asian pop at the Grammy Awards starting 2027. For more on this, I have Thomas Maresca with American news agency UPI here in the studio. Thomas, welcome back.
Thank you. Great to be here as always.
I also have Bernie Cho, the head of DFSB Kollective. Bernie, it's been such a long time. Welcome back.
Oh, good to be back. And I'm in Los Angeles, not in Nashville today, but wish I was in Nashville.
All right. I'll keep that in mind. We'll start here in the studio. Thomas, let's start with news of the Grammy adding an Asian Pop Award starting next year. What is it and why is it, if you will?
Yeah, so they announced, fairly recently that the Grammys are adding 5 new categories. And, I think the one that got the most attention is Best Asian Pop Music Performance. And they described it as, kind of coming from widely recognized Asian markets, but, not limited to, but K-pop, J-pop, C-pop, they mentioned in the announcement, and using meaningful use of one or more Asian languages is the kind of definition. Melody-driven pop is sort of the sound. And, according to the Recording Academy, which is, runs the Grammys, it was created to just recognize the breadth of Asian pop music and its growing impact across the global music landscape. Clearly, this has been building on momentum that has been coming along at the Grammys. I mean, BTS has been nominated, a couple of times already for Dynamite and Butter. We saw, I think, Rosé had a nomination, and K-pop Demon Hunters, the song Golden from that did win in the sort of visual category. So, this has been something that's been building. I mean, the presence of in particular K-pop at the Grammys, and the CEO of the Recording Academy, Harvey Mason Jr., sort of just talked about this being the right moment, to recognize the genre's scale, artistry, and global impact, as he said in an interview. And it comes along, as you mentioned. There's been a lot of reaction to it. I mean, from I think the Grammys' perspective, this, the awards have historically faced criticism already for being kind of not as inclusive, and it took them a while to, they introduced a rap or hip hop category, and they introduced a Latin, music category in recent years. But, other music awards have already incorporated some K-pop specific awards, like the MTV Video Music Awards has one, the American Music Awards, Billboard. So Grammys are catching up anyway, and clearly this wave has been growing. But as we'll discuss further, I think the reactions there's been some strong reactions to it.
Right, and before we delve into those reactions, Bernie, pundits believe that this new addition will raise the prospects of a win by a Korean artist or Korean act. Do you agree?
I have 3 answers to that one question: yes, no, and maybe. I think that the reason I have 3 answers is, obviously people's first knee-jerk reaction is, oh, finally, BTS actually has a shot of winning a Grammy. But as Thomas mentioned, if we dig a little deeper into the details of what would actually qualify a song or an artist for this particular Grammy Award, and look, it's a mouthful: Best Asian Pop Music Performance. When we read between the lines, and actually just read the lines, it actually might hurt rather than help Korean acts like BTS or Blackpink in being nominated, let alone win for a Grammy. There's basically one particular section that's got a lot of people, instead of doing fist pumping, head scratching, which is this idea of Asian language usage, multilingual, bilingual usage of language. No percentage was set, and this has got a lot of people confused as to who is going to make the decision that a particular song is Asian enough. in the Latin America, the Latin Grammy Awards, up until 2024, the bare minimum requirement to qualify was that 51% of the song had to be sung in Spanish or Portuguese or some language that's from Iberia. But basically, no percentage was set. And the irony is that a lot of the big hit K-pop songs are predominantly mostly English these days. And so many of the biggest hits from the biggest artists might be disqualified on the language criteria alone. And then the announcement of this being Best Asian Pop Music Performance, in the press release, it only cited K-pop, J-pop, and C-pop. So it obviously begs the question, what about Southeast Asian pop music or music from South Asia, particularly from India? Would they qualify for this particular category? And so as much as I think it's a goodwill, good faith gesture in the right direction, instead of sort of quelling critics, it actually, I think, raised a lot more criticisms as to what is this award and who actually really qualifies.
Right. That being said, then, Thomas, let's touch upon the criticism. What is being said?
Yes, I mean, Bernie addressed a lot of it. I think, also what I've seen, there has been a lot of discussion among critics and just sort of out in social media space about what this means. And, certainly one of the main questions, too, that people have raised is, whether this is just kind of doing a bit of like a cultural segregation, instead of, allowing K-pop or other acts to sort of, compete, or it might be seen as a way to not have to make that decision of, does this qualify for, Song of the Year, Album of the Year? But now it's like easier to just put it in this separate category and almost this sandboxing kind of impact. And a lot of people have discussed that it's kind of narrowing Asian acts into this, specific kind of segregated category. And one headline that I saw that I liked was here in the Korea Jungang Daily saying, is it a red carpet or a velvet rope for a group like BTS? Are you ushering them further in, or are you kind of keeping them to the side? So this is, definitely something that people are discussing. And, as Bernie mentioned too, there's just a lot of talk about, these language, the vagueness of the language requirements, and even the idea of like lumping such different genres, languages together into this one sort of amorphous category also does raise a lot of questions. And even further to, Bernie mentioned this too, it is the evolution of something like K-pop. It is not so much now just, Korean language focused, and we're seeing even, like HYBE, the BTS agency, has projects with a group in LA, Cat's Eye, these joint projects with Universal Music, or there's HYBE Latin America and Mexico with a group called Santos Bravos, and they're basically singing in local language, English or Spanish, but going through the entire K-pop production process, the training, and it's almost, become something else than just Korean music sung in Korean. K-pop has sort of evolved to this much bigger kind of genre, or at least, ecosystem or production style of its own. So, it almost is raising, even now, where it's sort of the question even is, what defines K-pop anyway? And so then trying to kind of answer that with this category maybe further muddles the question. But, at the same time, from a positive perspective, it is perhaps introducing more acts into this Grammy Awards. You could look at what happened with Latin music and, Bad Bunny actually winning the overall best album, coming, entirely in Spanish. So, there's a sense of, I think there's no perfect way to address this. And it's not to say the Grammys is really the be all end all answer to the question. But it has raised a lot of questions and criticisms.
Bernie, Thomas mentioned the evolution of K-pop. There are pundits who speak about the 5 generations of K-pop growth into the global arena. That being said, where do you suppose K-pop currently stands?
Well, look, I don't know much about 5G because, different people have different interpretations of what makes up a generation. But however, if we were to take a look at 2025, and mind you, this is without BTS, K-pop continued to grow, continued to expand, not just locally, regionally, but more important, globally. Just not too long ago, the IFPI, when they came out with their 2025 year in review, K-pop only got not just better, but bigger. When we look at the top 20 global artist chart, K-pop artists were the third most popular global artist behind just pop and hip hop. When we looked at the global album chart, K-pop was number 2 in terms of the top 20. And if we drill down further and looked at global album sales, K-pop was far and away the number 1 music genre in terms of top 20 best-selling albums in the world. When we slide over to Spotify, when we look at their top 50 global streaming songs, K-pop was 4th in the world, just behind alternative pop and Latin music, and ahead of hip hop, rock, and R&B. Currently, Luminate has South Korea year on year, continuing to be the 4th largest net exporter in the world. And right now, when we look at the Circle charts, whether it's global K-pop artists or even the most popular K-pop artists in the region, 80% of the top 20 global and regional K-pop artists are what I call from the diaspora. They have members that are either overseas Koreans or just frankly from overseas, non-Korean members. 80% of the top 20 K-pop artists have at least one member that does not have a Korean passport. So this, I think, clearly shows that K-pop continues to grow globally, not just in terms of sales, in terms of popularity, but now the makeup of the artists themselves.
Right, some remarkable milestones, if I may say so myself. Bernie, we've also been told that short-form video platforms are altering the music industry landscape. What's been the impact on K-pop, do you think?
Well, the one thing that we've seen with the popularity of short-form platforms, be it TikTok or Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts, is because there's such an emphasis on just quick hit, get your attention moments. Just globally, and this applies to K-pop, hit songs have become shorter and shorter. When I first started in the business, the average single was about 4.5 minutes. Now it's down to 2.5 minutes, and you have to make impact in the first 30 seconds. And again, really in terms of the power of and the influence of K-pop on short form platforms, last year TikTok had not one but 2 K-pop acts collect accolades. EJ from Huntrix of K-pop Demon Hunters, she was selected and voted as the Songwriter of the Year. She had the most popular song on TikTok. And the Global Artist of the Year, we have to count them in because they literally have a K in their name, but they're very much K-pop influenced, is Cat's Eye. They were designated and tapped as the Global Artist of the Year. And so I think one of the beauties of the short form platforms is the fact that it really caters to the appeal of K-pop because 1, it's lyrically driven, 2, it's visually driven, and 3, dance. Dance videos go viral instantly, incredibly, and internationally. And so K-pop has really leaned into the power, the influence, and the impact of short form video platforms.
Right, indeed. And Thomas, given the popularity of K-pop on the global stage, the Culture Ministry here in South Korea has spoken about a support package for smaller music agencies to advance into the international market. Could you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, so this was just introduced recently, like a couple of weeks ago. It's the Culture Ministry, along with the Korea Creative Content Agency, announced a program called Global Leap Forward Support Project. And annually, it's supposed to select 10 groups or agencies, and they'll receive up to 300 million won, around $200,000+ for up to 3 years to basically finance their international promotions, videos, overseas tours. And, this comes, along with the incredible growth of K-pop globally. It has become a more and more kind of consolidated or polarized market as well. I mean, it's the big 4 basic groups or, agencies or HYBE, SM, YG, and JYP. And, they really dominate just the entire industry. And it's, K-pop exports surged almost 33% last year, but very, very, top heavy among those groups. And, just some numbers from the government, the conglomerate spent around 43 billion won on music production each, where compared to something like 1.5 billion won among sort of smaller agencies, and major label acts perform abroad 20 times more frequently than indie counterparts. So the idea is to kind of, try to kickstart or give some more, give a boost to sort of the smaller indie, small and medium-sized agencies, and kind of, in a sense, I think the idea is, maybe it's never good if so much consolidation is in the hands of just so few, and maybe it allows for a little bit more of a diverse ecosystem, getting some different sounds and different acts. So, and the idea too is, I think they're trying to keep this a flexible source of funding. There's no one size fits all to the agencies that are receiving this funding, as far as you have to spend it in this way or that way. So they're giving some examples in the announcement, and like certain groups. So one group is called Rescene, and they're targeting Japanese and American markets and looking for appearances at KCON LA, whereas other groups are pushing into Japan or spending money on music videos, and one is holding a showcase in Mumbai, India. One sort of indie band, Can't Be Blue, is leveraging its selection in Spotify's Radar program to try to build grassroots. So the idea is to kind of give some flexibility and give some opportunities. And it happens, not to say the big four are not also doing their own big international operations. They're joining forces reportedly to start this overall big fan convention, among the big four groups. So they're still doing their thing, obviously, but I think the idea is, you don't want K-pop to become so sort of standardized or so controlled by a handful that it kind of suffocates the creativity around the rest of the industry. Right. That's the idea behind it, anyway.
Bernie, I wonder, what are your thoughts regarding such support measures by the government?
Honestly, I think it's intriguing, it's interesting, it's bold, but a little risky. Essentially, I think that this particular project, as much as it's an investment, I also think it's a bit of a bet, because, look, it's very expensive to discover, develop, and debut a Korean music artist in general, not just K-pop. And so, as much as the grants look generous, at the same time, realistically, to go global takes a lot more money. But look, some money is better than no money. And so, for one thing, I was very encouraged and really happy to see that when they gave out these grants, number one, these grants are not just a one-off sort of hit and run. It's a 3-year program where these particular companies are going to receive money for 3 straight years. And again, as Thomas mentioned, they're not going to be restricted in terms of exactly how they need to spend the money. I think as much as it's for the companies and for the industry, but also for the government, they want to see what actually works. Why not have 5 different companies try possibly maybe 5 different approaches? So I think the fact that there's a bit of flexibility in that, I think, is good, maybe even great. The other thing that I really appreciated was the fact that, again, Thomas hit on it, is the fact that they picked 5 very different agencies who are doing 5 very different types of music and types of genres with 5 very different types of goals. And again, I think that this is very much kind of an experimental work in progress approach, which I think is right. And then last but not least is that I like the fact that this is something that they've put out there really to sort of help not just one sector of the industry, but often a very overlooked and ignored part of the industry, which is the smaller indie agencies. Now, mind you, I think it's very bold that the government wants to help, but the big 4 companies in Korea, the Fab 4 companies, and again, we have to drop names. It's HYBE, SM, JYP, and YG. They annually generate more revenues than many music markets in the world. So the fact that the government wants to help the smaller guys, catch up to speed, I think it's a bit of a gamble. And again, some of these companies, like, we have to remind ourselves that right now HYBE and the combination of Kakao SM, they're technically the 4th and 5th largest record labels in the world. They're global. They're no longer regional. They're no longer local. And so I think it's great that the government wants to help smaller, more startup entities. But again, I look at it as kind of an incubator and an accelerator program that's not just an investment, but very much really research in terms of what else out there could possibly maybe work. So I'm encouraged by it, but I think on my side, on my end, and I think a lot of my peers would feel the same way, we have to keep very modest, measured expectations as to what the result and impact will be. But look, it's a really important step in the right direction.
Right. All right, then. That being said, speaking as a foreign journalist based here in South Korea, Thomas, what aspects of the K-pop or Hallyu industry would you be keeping your eyes on going forward?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting for me personally being here. I think I've seen kind of this, not the start of it, but really when I came was right around the time of BTS really exploding and sort of Parasite winning the Oscars, and for a lot of us here that it's not necessarily like this is the specific area we're covering, sometimes there was that question of, oh, is this a fad that's going to die out or something like that, and obviously it hasn't, and it's kept growing, but now it's sort of, the whole, not just K-pop, but the music, or the film industry and sort of the other, content industries are maturing, and it's interesting to see how do they take these next steps. And we are seeing challenges that they're running into. I mean, even just sort of discussing some of the things we've been talking about, the consolidation of power at the top. I mean, that's a huge concern in the content creation industry. And some industries are really struggling, and it surprises people overseas to hear something like the cinema industry is really, even after Parasite and these big wins, is really shrinking. The domestic demand is down. The domestic demand, I think, is down for K-pop as well in Korea. So there's just a lot of interesting new developments to see how do they navigate this. I mean, there's stuff like AI, in the cinema industry. I did a story recently about, one of the first AI based movies, and just that's a question. And I think another thing that I've been reading about that's interesting is just this idea of, sustainable growth, where there's a lot of the IP structure, the intellectual property structure, is actually kind of a challenge that Korean content is running into. I think more so maybe in some of the filmed, or like something like K-pop Demon Hunters. That's not necessarily coming back to the Korean creators as far as content that they own. It's funded by Netflix and the Japanese Sony studios, and so a lot of the big name Korean products that are known around the world are not necessarily, the IP is not here. I read something that Korea doesn't have a single company on the list of the world's top 50 intellectual property holders, which is, surprising when you think of the size and scope. So I think those ideas about how the ecosystem develops, matures, is there going to be at some point a global saturation? How do you kind of keep it fresh and keep it going? I mean, in general, Korea has never failed to sort of surprise and be able to take a next step. I mean, I think so many times for us here, you think, oh, wow, what could come next? And then it just is something big. So always looking out for the next big thing. But it is interesting to see this kind of maturing market. And how do you keep it going?
Right, indeed. Bernie, we have like about a minute left there in LA. What aspects of K-pop appears to be gaining attention?
Well, I think, and this is something I've said over and over again, but if anything, I think it has more relevance, and I'm just going to amplify it again, is, look, K-pop music has become pop music now here in the U.S., and I think where the reason why K-pop is not going to, expire on the 15 minutes of fame is there's become more of an emphasis and focus on not just K-pop music, but the K-pop music business model. And as we're seeing a lot of curiosity, a lot of fascination, but more importantly, a lot of application of best practices from the K-pop music industry now crossing over and carrying over to the U.S. international global music industry as well. And in one particular area is not just fans, super fans, fandoms, but the fandustry. The industry behind fans is something that the U.S. music industry is closely, carefully studying as to if it can be replicated. And look, so far, early signs are very encouraging. I think the poster child for the year right now is Cat's Eye. Proof of concept that the K-pop music business model can be applied successfully to non-Korean music acts.
Right, indeed. Those are the thoughts of Bernie Cho, the head of DFSB, with regard to K-pop and the future ahead. Bernie, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today.
Okay, thank you.
Thomas here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, that ends Thursday's edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.